Awesome. Thanks so much, Fran, and excited to be here today at Duke Disrupts 2020. I'm a second year here at Fuqua. My background is in technology, where I did business operations and analytics. And this past summer, I interned at Google. And so, yeah, just wanted to share that we'll be using the same link for all of the talks and all of the panels today. So if you ever have to hop off, feel free to return to the original link. Also wanted to say, feel free to put in questions in the Q&A portion, and we'll be addressing those questions towards the latter half of each keynote, and then obviously within each panel. And it's also my pleasure now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Bryce Caswell from Amazon. And Bryce began her career after graduating from Harvard with a degree in government. She worked for Abercrombie & Fitch doing international real estate in Asia before leaving to launch her own jewelry line. During this time, Bryce also began working for an edtech startup as a product developer before attending Fuqua for her MBA as part of the class of 2014. At Amazon, Bryce has held roles in retail, product management, and now program management, where she owns a worldwide team of 50 people that help identify and implement technology for Amazon logistics delivery stations. We can't express how grateful we are to have Bryce with us, especially to have one of our own Fuquans, and especially to be hearing from someone from Amazon, which is so relevant at this time. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Bryce. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. So hi, everyone. I'm incredibly flattered and honored to be here today. I also would like to say happy day 2 of Prime Day. So it's kind of a unique day for us here at Amazon. But it's perfect that this kind of coincides in talking about tech and this theme of disruption. As John mentioned, I've had quite a few roles at Amazon, and so thought I would give a little bit more of my background here to give some ideas of the types of projects I've worked on and different areas of disruption I'm going to kind of cover today. So when I started, one of the big places I started in was retail, and I worked both doing vendor management, which was kind of owning a P&L of a business, as well, and in fact, it was above ground pools, which a lot of people don't know Amazon sells, but was some, and I didn't know they sold them until I took over the business, and you'd be surprised how big that business is. I then kind of moved into supply chain management and understanding from start to finish whether we're getting goods and having to import them, whether they're being manufactured here, how do we actually go through quality testing, how do we understand what's happening, how do we work with vendors, and then how do we get stuff to our customers. So understanding that end-to-end journey. And then I actually moved over and worked on product for ship cost optimization. So the technology I really worked on developing was a lot around how do I understand what's happening with our packages and where is there an opportunity to get things to customers more quickly and at a less expensive price. And so a lot of the tech I worked to help develop was focused on that. And that actually drove me to wanting to take this job with Amazon Logistics that I have now. And the reason I think it's so unique is if you look at where Amazon is really growing and what has really happened in our network, and where there's kind of an opportunity for disruption, I think Amazon Logistics is kind of this perfect example of an area that's really ripe for disruption, even within Amazon itself. And that was something that was really appealing to me. Amazon Logistics is the way I would think about it, just so everyone knows, is it's the part of the company where when you get a package to your door and it's not coming from UPS or USPS, that means it's coming from basically Amazon and Amazon Logistics. And so understanding how do we scale a network of drivers, how do we set up delivery stations, how do we make our app function in a really interesting way, that's what I've really been focused on working on. And I have everything from product managers to technical product managers to design engineers to program managers that work for me at this point in time. And our constant thought is how do we deal with any issues that are popping up? And how do we kind of think through what is going to be the next iteration and how we have to grow the company? So that brings me into my kind of theme today about talking about disruption. And I thought about the speeches I've given over the years about thinking about tech, and I think the intro actually to this day was perfect. I don't know if any of you are fans of the 1985 movie Back to the Future, but it's one of my favorite movies where Emmett Brown, you know, that's got this great opening sequence of devices that are kind of connected and end up dumping, you know, some dog food in, and it's kind of this very basic and not internet-driven connectivity, but a connected devices. And then if you look at the evolution of the first kind of Internet of Things device to ever exist was a toaster in 1989. And then largely the term Internet of Things and kind of that view of disruptive technology started about 1999 and has evolved since then. So when I think of disruption, there's really two ways I think Amazon approaches it, which is pretty interesting. So the first you have is really this idea of where do we think the future is going to be? And if that's where we think things are going, there might be an idea that we are ready for and want to launch, and people just are not yet ready to adopt. One of the things that Amazon does well is they're willing to take a chance on ideas and fail quickly. And you'll also see several iterations of those ideas that end up driving a lot of our future innovation. So I think people may remember Amazon launched a phone a long time ago, which did not work. And it was something we ended up as a product deciding that's not where the company was going to go. What a lot of people don't know, though, is a lot of the technology that went into that phone ended up being the background and a lot of the technology behind Alexa. And so what's kind of interesting is while our phone didn't do what we would have hoped, the learnings we got from it, the understanding of the actual technology was really used to power Alexa and connected devices. And that when Alexa started, people were constantly trying to figure out what are the limits of where this technology can go. And I think we're constantly exploring that. The world is becoming smarter and smarter, and there's more expectation of technology being built into common products where before we haven't seen it. And so on a very regular basis, you look at our Alexa division and they're constantly working at integrating with multiple companies across every business line you can think of how do we actually think about this in the right way and how will it work for the customer. And through all of this, the common theme on the disruptive technology component is what is the actual customer journey and experience, and how do we take that and figure out a way to kind of work through it. And so one thing I kind of wanted to touch on that I think is pretty interesting about this is as you're working through a customer journey, there are times when technology may become disruptive because you're able to eliminate gaps or processes that take time, that are annoying, that cause extra friction for a customer. One of these examples I think is really interesting of an evolution of a disruptive technology. So most people, you may or may not have heard of Amazon Go. So the idea of Amazon Go is these are pop-up stores. They started off as a small format, almost convenient sized store where customers could go in. You didn't need a wallet. You just needed your mobile phone. You could scan in, walk in, pick up a orange or a soda and just walk back out without having to have your wallet and pay. And the sensors that we had and the technology we put in would instantly detect that. Now, what this really did, it didn't change the act of people physically going in and shopping or picking something up, but it eliminated a lot of the hassle of doing it. And it took out steps like having to keep track of your wallet, having to, pull out cards, having to go through an interaction with scanning and actually checking out your goods. This enabled a very quick and easy in and out of the store. If you look at what we just did this year, we've expanded that now from kind of a convenient size work, design more business format to now going to a full-blown store like supermarket where this can happen and lines are eliminated. So I think that's a really good example of an evolution of what can you do with this type of technology. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of where you're going to see that application. Another way I think, so that's an example of taking a technology and inventing something to change the customer experience. I think in addition, you have disruption that comes as a necessity. And so that's really where I wanted to talk about COVID and kind of what it's obviously changed the way the world is operating right now. And I think a lot of the technology we've seen, so thermometers and heat scanners and things like that, these have been in existence in a format, but because of what's happening in the world and the fact that people's behavior has changed so rapidly, there's been a necessity to better build this technology to get latency down, to have something faster, to understand how you can recreate your processes given new constraints, and what is the technology that's going to be there to support that. And so I think when you're in something like COVID, what Amazon, in my experience, what we really focused on was first starting from the basics. Okay, so starting and looking at what are customers going to be asking us for? What are our employees going to expect? What do our drivers expect? How do we make everyone safe? What are the basic things that you start with? And then you start thinking about, okay, now that we've established this process, how do we make it better? How do we make it faster? How do we try to make it, what new technology do we need to build to eliminate some of these things that are cumbersome while it still keeps the people safe and kind of moves things forward? So I think a lot of what I've worked on, particularly in COVID, beyond safety protocols and understanding how our metrics, how we measure social distancing, how we make sure people are staying 6 feet apart, how do we ensure that, processes work. When you have entire delivery stations or entire operations or assumptions based on a physical process of how people will do things, and then that changes, or shopping patterns change, how do you innovate your technology to keep up? And so a lot of what I'm finding I'm being asked to do right now is take a process that we used to do in a different way, look at how it now has to be done under our current constraints to keep everyone safe, and say, what can I take out of this process to remove some of the cumbersome elements while getting to the end goal of, like, it's got to work like this now and it has to stay safe. And what we end up finding are there are a lot of steps that we used to have that we can remove and do through technology. And so a lot of one of the things I've recently been working on is there are a couple of processes for our drivers when they finish dropping off all their packages and kind of delivering, of figuring out how can we get them to be able to finish their shift and not have a need for them to necessarily come back to a delivery station and have a face-to-face conversation, but make sure they still have the same level of support and could do everything that they could do in that conversation. And how can I look at the app that we've created and what the driver experience is and get all of that into an app format with app support, right? So a lot of this uses current technology, but again, because we're going through a behavior disruption, we have to adapt a lot of technology to kind of step up to meet that. So that's kind of the piece I wanted to talk about, of like how we approach a pandemic. Again, starting from the simple of what do we need for our customers and what are the complaints, what are the questions, what are the fears that people have, and how do we enforce safety first and then look at how we can improve. But I think the most fundamental thing is, like, how can you do all of that while keeping people safe? In general, with disruptive technology, I think the thing I've really appreciated about Amazon as I mentioned earlier, this concept of timing, right? And if we talk about, back to my reference of 1989 and this first ever toaster, there's kind of some irony in that basically 20 years later, we had a conference in 2019 where we had an inventor come and talk about a toaster oven that was connected through Alexa. And there were a lot of similarities. And what you find is that if you don't have something like COVID that physically changes people's behavior very quickly and you adopt technology to kind of support that, you end up with building technology over time, like with Alexa or with connected devices, where it's going to just slowly evolve but continues to be disruptive. And the last thing I'll say is, before I open for Q&A, is we look at devices, or not devices, at industries that are ripe for disruption and how Amazon has kind of instructed and said how we should think about it. We start again with the customer journey. And I think this is something that's not necessarily just at Amazon. I think all of your tech companies are going to do a lot with this, but it's looking at what does someone actually do and where is there an opportunity to make that experience easier. I think if you look at, even within Amazon, this entire concept of like how we ship goods and services, right? And there's a lot of thought right now on sustainability, like how do you remove boxing and packaging? How do you actually reduce the amount of miles you have to drive? How do you pull things out of the sky so you're not contributing to carbon emissions? How do you think about where you source? How do you think about the materials you source with? How could we change the way we do things? I think people probably saw the article about Amazon has now got approval to kind of use drones in some capacity, right? So how do we take all these technologies and figure out where industries that have been kind of operating in a similar way, where there are places of friction that technology can step in and eliminate. And you start building here, once you have a great understanding of the customer journey or the pain points that exist, that's when you can start figuring out how to adapt your technology or how to introduce something new. So with that, there's kind of a lot of different themes, but the pieces I really wanted to touch on is understanding sometimes you have behavior change and technology needs to adapt, or sometimes you come up with the technology first and behavior isn't quite there and it's an evolution over time. Either way, I think disruption is something you can practice in any company you're in. And so what I'd like to do is now open it up because I'm sure people have lots of questions. I know probably one of the demands is what are the coolest things that Amazon is doing that's top secret right now that you're excited about, which I will just tell you up front, I can't answer. But happy to share anything I can and would love to just take any questions and be able to answer any questions people might have around Amazon or kind of this disruption theme.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Bryce. And just while we have some of the questions coming in, just wanted to share some of my thoughts. I really liked what you shared about timing, especially that makes me think of Jeff Bezos' TED Talk when he talks about, you know, the gold rush and then, you know, that's like right before the internet rush happened. And so it's such a good, analogy. One question that I had, especially when you brought up the example of Amazon made a phone, which I had no idea about, but you know, that phone was eventually used to make Alexa, which Plug is like one of the best deals on Prime Day right now. I saw the Alexa on there for half off. Yep. But my question is about kind of this culture of innovation and of growth at Amazon. You know, the history is well known, well documented that, you know, the company invests heavily in growth, invests heavily in innovation. And sometimes that's to the chagrin of shareholders. But would love to hear kind of an insider's view of how does the company drive a culture of innovation and how does the company, you know, get everyone bought into the vision to be able to constantly produce these products and even like innovative services that Amazon provides?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So there's two ways I see this happen. One is I think it's somewhat known, but Amazon uses what we call a PRFAQ process. So the idea behind it is for any new idea you have, product, innovation, you actually put together a press release of what, pretend this was in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or whatever it might be, about your product coming out and the innovation you've developed. And the thought process behind, if you were a consumer reading this announcement, what would your questions be and how have you thought about it? What problem does it end up solving for the customer? And those PRFAQs go through, it's a written document. You spend about a page outlining what the final thing is you're delivering, and then you spend several pages going through every potential question. You run that by multiple teams and stakeholders. You get a lot of feedback and iteration. And you look at the possibilities of, am I thinking about this idea correctly or am I not? And we do that even for things. So I personally just had one come up where Jeff Bezos had an idea and passed it down to one of his kind of senior vice presidents who came to a couple different teams and said, go figure out the feasibility of this idea. And so even though it had come directly from Jeff, I'd love to say that we were just able to go and say, oh, yes, it'll work, or no, it will not work, but that's not really an Amazonian answer. And so what we had to do was go and say, hey, in order to implement this in a short time frame, here's how we would look at the problem and here's how we'd have to approach it. Here are the trade-offs we'd have to make and here's what's feasible and what's not. And then we looked at and said, however, if you want a longer term solution that's more scalable, here are the other things that are in the pipeline that it might be more worth investing our time or additional resources here versus pursuing this idea. And the whole thing was done in a PRFAQ format. So even though we're going back to someone about their own idea, we still present that way. So I think that's one way that we kind of maintain that culture of innovation. The second thing is our leaders are constantly taught to question. And it's probably what my team finds the most annoying about me is when they bring a great idea and they've put in a lot of thought to it. My job is to sit there and say, okay, but have you thought about this? And what's like the 2.0 version of it? Like, why would you just, you're telling me you want to translate step for step this thing into this app, but like, why do you need this at all? What's the actual end game of what the benefit is for the driver or the customer or the delivery associate? Tell me like what we're trying to actually solve, and why do you need these steps to even do that? Why not approach it in a whole different way where you don't even need to do any of this and it's much easier and a cleaner experience? And so that's constantly what we're pushing on is don't, it's always day one, right? That idea of like you always need to push and be innovative and thinking through the next thing. And the reality is our tech teams are also really great because what they'll tell you every time is we can solve anything. We can build it. It's a question of hours and time and investment, but we can build anything to solve this. The question is it worth it? And how many people will it impact? And what's the real benefit that we're going to get? So I think by constantly having those discussions and never getting away with a simple answer without getting questioned, even when you've done something great, I think it constantly keeps your mind evolving into what am I going to do that's the next thing? How do I need to think about this differently?
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Bryce. I see that we have some questions coming in now. So this first question says, hi, Bryce, do you see Amazon having a fully in-house air cargo transportation network, or will Amazon still be partnering with large air cargo service providers?
It's a great question. I think what I can say is I think Amazon is going to continue to try to scale our network to the best of our ability and as large as we need to be. I think right now we're in a situation where as Amazon's continued to grow, we're not ready right now to be our own network. We're very reliant and grateful for the partners that we have. But I also think Amazon knows how the industry evolves, and we're very ready and constantly thinking towards what if we did have to have just our own network and what would that look like. I don't see that being immediate by any stretch, but I think there's always a look towards how do we handle our volume and what our customer demand is going to be, and how do we reduce risk both from having anything be internal as well as working with external partners. So that's kind of the closest answer I can get you is I don't think it's not possible, but I don't think that's immediately where we are in the near future, what we'll be looking at.
Okay, awesome. And we have another question here. Can you discuss how the Amazon Flex Driver program has grown over the past few years and where you see innovation coming in this space?
Yes. So I've actually had the opportunity, and I'm not sure any of you have ever gotten to try this, but I have had lots of opportunity to go out and actually be a flex driver for Amazon and try out the experience. And it is really revealing and really humbling when you go out and you're trying to figure out where a house is or what the parking is or where you go in the, what key, like key code to key in. And so it's actually something I have my team do really regularly, and I have the tech teams I work with do very regularly. I think the innovation is what the experience is. So one of the things we really want to reduce, I think from the Amazon side, we want to make this as seamless and as efficient of an experience as possible for the driver. And what that means is that we need to find ways to improve the experience to the point that there's a lot of repeated drivers that want to come back and keep doing this, that it's a well-paid, well-compensated job for the work, that we make address quality very high, that we think about solutions like bathroom breaks, or can we direct people to restaurants or gas, or how are we supporting making sure our drivers know, hey, there might be a dog, barking in this yard, or how do we let people know the experiences they're going to face so they feel comfortable, supported, and safe. The Flex program has been fantastic and continues to grow, and I think it will continue to grow. We have entire markets and countries where that's the only thing we use is Flex drivers. So I think it's really getting into it's called Rabbit, which is the app we do this with, but I think it's really getting into the innovation of the app and how we can, through that app, create a great driver experience that's easy and really understandable. And I think that's kind of my immediate focus on what we're doing.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Bryce. I know we're just coming up on time, but would love to ask you just one more question.
Sure.
We have a question that says, what role does social impact sustainability play at Amazon? Is it part of the business case process for justifying ideas?
Yeah, It plays a huge role. So we have multiple teams that actually focus exclusively on sustainability. And actually the initiative I was talking about earlier of this being like a Jeff Bezos kind of question and idea is also something that's targeted very much around the sustainability front. So in everything that we're doing, that question is coming up. I'm always looking at electric vehicles. When we're looking at packaging, it's understanding how do we reduce it. We're pushing a lot of our vendors to go to where Amazon does not need to provide a box at all, and how do we actually process those goods. So I think sustainability is not, it's not just something people are saying, it's literally entire tech teams, entire product teams, program teams that are significantly invested in figuring out from all fronts of our business, the buildings we're constructing, our FCs, our drivers, our packaging, everything. How do we reduce it, and what is the plan to truly do something unique in the space and change the way we approach things?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again so much, Bryce. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. This time seems to go by fast. I don't know if it's the virtual setting, but we could listen to you talk about the innovation at Amazon all day. But thank you again so much for your time.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.